Hey guys, we are the Real Housemates of Horror. Welcome back to our channel. So today we're going to be talking about how horror movies affect children, teens, and adults socially as well as in the long and short term. If you're new to our channel, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button and hit the bell to get notifications. Alright, now before we move on to talking about children, we want you guys to think hard about the most vivid memory you have of watching a horror movie as a child and keep that experience in mind while watching this video. Okay, let's start with the little goobers. Watching Friday the 13th with your child is probably not the best idea, says Dr. Daniel Sketcher from the Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital and assistant professor at Columbia University. While adults have the ability to differentiate between reality and fantasy, young children don't have the same sense of reality and oftentimes do not understand the violence and concept of these horror films. Let's talk a little bit about why children are motivated to watch horror movies in the first place. First, curiosity. Kids are curious. They want to explore new ideas and worlds. 2. Peer pressure. Sometimes kids want to fit in. Most would feel like they would have to go to watch a scary movie if all their friends are doing it too. 3. The thrill factor. Sometimes kids just want to have the adrenaline rush and have fun with their friends. But horror movies have short-term and long-term effects on these kids. They can develop severe anxiety and also suffer from sleeping disorders. Horror can even affect them socially by making them more aggressive and prone to exhibiting self-endangering behaviors.
We even found this really cool study which looked at the psychological effects that people remember experiencing as a child, at like 10 or 11 years old, as a result of watching a particularly scary horror movie. So this study was broken up into two main parts. The first part of the study asked 202 participants who are about 19 years old to describe in detail their most vivid memory of being scared by a movie as a child through an anonymous questionnaire. This questionnaire consisted of only open-ended questions that asked about the circumstances surrounding their viewing experience, any effects they experienced both while watching and afterward, and who they watched it with. The results were interesting, but not entirely surprising. After watching, the participants typically experienced generalized fear, nightmares, wild imagination, and insomnia. But the most interesting trend was that most participants didn't really talk about how they felt while watching it. The second part of the study also used a questionnaire but added on more multiple choice questions with a few more open-ended or scale-based questions. Some of the major questions included who the participants identified with in the movies and who or what was particularly scary to them. The scale-based questions asked how realistic the participant thought the movie was, how often they watched similar movies afterward, and if they would like that kind of movie in the present. The results were pretty much the same as in the first part of the study, but this time we learned that common behaviors exhibited during the movie included them hiding their eyes, holding on to something, or being jumpy while watching. And interestingly, 30% of the children could not finish the movie. Overall, this study shows that most, if not all people, have a strong, detailed memory of watching horror movies as a child and can list at least one instance of doing so in great detail, including the social situation at the time they watched it, as well as the psychological outcomes and or consequences they experienced as a result of it. Another interesting correlation the study found was that the more realistic the movie was, the more frightening it was for children. Like we said before, this study saw that the younger the participants were when they watched the movie, the more negative consequences they remember experiencing, and the more they gravitated toward horror in the present. Participants also reported experiencing having more sleep problems and fears after watching the movie.
As you can see, watching horror movies at an early age can have a multitude of effects when it comes to influencing your behavior or personality and prompting key fears in you that carry on to adulthood. So watch out for you little goobers. Now, let's talk about the teeny boppers. Yes, we're talking about the teens, guys.
I'm sure we can all remember the time when we hit the age of 13. When suddenly, we had to start dealing with the world's problems. And as you would expect, as we got older, those problems didn't go away, but rather they became more and more apparent, and we had to develop ways to deal with them. Between the ages of 13 and 19, Children begin entering the age where society begins to affect them directly, and many of them are unaware of the appropriate ways to respond and handle these situations. Horror movies could be a contributing factor to how teens react to social conflicts, as it has been theorized that the content found in these movies can influence or enhance aggressive behavior in teens. More times than not, teens fail to realize the short and long-term effects that come with watching horror movies. Some short-term effects are often overlooked, such as restlessness or nightmares, which arise as a result of the residual fears left behind after watching a horror movie. With effects such as these, why do teens enjoy watching horror movies in the first place? Bachelor of Psychology Faria Osman supposes that teens enjoy watching horror movies because of their similarity to roller coasters, a high rush of adrenaline followed by feelings of relief and security. Also, a study conducted in 2005 came to the conclusion that teens view horror movies as an easy way to face their fears while knowing that they won't be hurt or affected in the long run. Not to mention that teens in this age are genuine thrill seekers, and what better place to seek thrill than a horror movie? This can all be tied to the idea of cognitive dissonance, described as an inconsistency between how someone perceives himself and their actions that may follow. Leon Festinger curated a study on this idea using a questionnaire data collecting method on teens around the age of 19. Volunteers were asked questions about whether or not they felt fear during or after a horror movie, along with whether or not they experienced fear in real life after watching the movie, and if they felt fear while in the dark. The majority of responses for both males and females leaned towards yes, implying that the horror movies that they watched were taking some kind of effect. Later on in the questionnaire, when asked to describe their personality, many of them used adjectives like soft or temperate, which can be considerably confusing when paired with the other results. When watching a horror movie, teens do not immediately believe that what they are watching is having any effect on them as a person, so their overall personality may change as a result of watching horror movies without them ever becoming aware that those movies were the driving force of that change all along. This illustrates an example of cognitive dissonance, as how teens perceive themselves may not align with their newly found actions. Conclusively, as teens become more directly exposed to societal issues, they could be responding to them in unexpected ways, as horror movies are very talented at masking any kind of effect on its viewers.
Finally, let's discuss the oldies.
I want you to think about your favorite movie genres and think about whether the horror genre will fall on your ranking. A survey conducted showed that horror movies were the last to come along the most popular movie genres for adults in the United States. The findings revealed that 52% of all the respondents agreed to enjoy horror the most. Now, many people have different reasons to why they go to the movies to see the latest scary film or decide to watch them at home, more specifically adults. There are a variety of theories and claims out there that explain why adults watch these movies. Some of the main ones are psychoanalysis, drive theory, arousal theory, and cognitive film theory. However, a dissertation conducted 2 studies to figure out the real reason why adults watch horror movies. Studies were done on a group of people watching multiple genres of movies. From the data, quote, respondents with high levels of thrill-seeking motivations are overrepresented in both the high and medium horror film preference categories, end quote. And, quote, respondents' high and arousal-seeking motivations are overrepresented in the high and medium categories of horror film viewing preferences, end quote. The second study was a questionnaire and, quote, analysis of overall horror film viewing motivations revealed I like being scared was reported more frequently, end quote. From the overall dissertation, it was concluded that, quote, arousal-seeking and vicarious thrill were primary viewing motives of the sample, end quote.
I also want you to think about how you feel and what you do after watching the movie. There are a few articles on the effects of watching horror movies on adults, one of which was about exploring whether the portrayal of horror could affect the urge to smoke over and above the portrayal of smoking. There were a total of 4,073 participants, of whom 585 were smokers, and 26 movies. 2 of the movies were horror. One contained smoking scenes, and the other didn't. The rest were other genres with and without smoking scenes. It was concluded that smokers who viewed the horror film without smoking scenes had a higher urge to smoke on leaving the movie. These results were due to a large short-term increase in stress and negative effects from the movie. The negative effects can also serve as a motivator of drug administration or relapse. Another article that was published by Brad J. Bushman in 2006 tested whether the results of the accumulated studies on media violence and aggressive behavior are consistent with the theories that exist to explain the effects on children and adults. The article used meta-analysis to statistically combine the results of multiple scientific studies. These results showed that short-term effects of violent media, like aggression and violent thoughts, were greater for adults, while long-term effects, such as trauma and insomnia, were greater for children. This is because children have modifiable minds and are more likely to mimic what they see over a period of time, unlike adults who are more mature and stable. Have you ever experienced any of these effects before? Feel free to include them in the comment section below. Well, that's it for today's video, fellow housemates. Comment down below what you want to see next week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Bye, guys!